Welcome to Triptych.
Three friends having a chat
About three artistic masterpieces.
Making connections for modern life.
Welcome to episode 4 of Triptych, and it's great to have the gang all together. Sophie, are you there?
Yeah, I'm there.
You
How's
are
it
there.
going?
It's going. Joel, how about you?
I'm also here, little far from you guys, but here nonetheless.
You're here and there and all over the place. There's that great Alan Bennett line from The Madness of George III when he knows that he's beginning to lose the plot, and he says, "I'm all here, but I'm not all there." It's one of my favourite lines in theatre. Anyway, moving swiftly on. Okay, just sort of
somehow.
opening gambit question. Then, what is your go-to for sort of an artistic expression of joy, Sophie?
If it's going to be real joy, I have to go straight to the music, and usually classical music. So if we're feeling particularly joyous, I'll stick on maybe Rachmaninoff's Rhapsody on a Theme by Paganini, and I'll air conduct it because it's just so fun. So I love air conducting that. So that's my big expression of joy. Yeah.
Okay. Joel.
Probably Snarky Puppy.
Snarky Puppy.
Think, they're like joy in a bottle. Yeah, I love their arrangements and the energy that they bring to that kind of blend of jazz and pop. So I think if I'm like wanting to wash dishes and need to be happy about that, I'm gonna put on Snarky Puppy.
Well, for me, I would say that air conducting is pretty much my game as well. So you got there first, Sophie. But anything big, monstrous, sort of 150 players, Mahler's Symphony of 1,000, something like that.
Yeah.
It's got to be big, and that'll do me absolutely fine. So there we are. Let's get cracking.
My masterpiece is Baltimore by the Tamlins. Baltimore is actually a cover of a cover. The song was written, I guess it was recorded originally by Randy Newman. Not sure when he wrote it, but he recorded it in 1977. And then it was recorded by Nina Simone in 1978. And I'm pretty sure it was the Nina Simone version that got the attention of the Tamlins. They were a vocal group that started in the 1970s. They're probably known much more for their harmonic abilities and their blend, which eventually led them to be doing a lot of vocal support for lots of artists, for Jimmy Cliff, for Peter Tosh, for John Holt. But through the 70s, they were working on their own career. But Baltimore was probably, I would say, their biggest song of the 70s. They recorded it in 78. It was produced by Sly and Robbie, a famous production duo in Jamaica. They're a bassist and a drummer. And they did a lot of studio production for a lot of people. And had quite a distinct sound, which you hear on this particular track. The song itself is a lament, originally written by Randy Newman, of course, for the city of Baltimore. You hear his heart breaking over the conditions of the city. And he starts out with, he doesn't start out with a human character. He starts out with a beat up little seagull who's looking for the sea. And then the contrast of, the seagull is on these marble stairs, the contrast of what should be opulence with what's kind of become a type of degradation and loss. Yeah, he goes through and then he starts to introduce human characters, a prostitute, a drunk on the corner. And then the chorus is, "Oh, Baltimore, man, it's hard just to live." And yeah, it's just this sense of it's this place he loves, but just a hard place to be. As the song progresses, eventually he and his siblings leave Baltimore and head for a rural part of the state where it feels like, okay, life is going to be better, but there's still this lament for the city that goes through.
Oh, Baltimore, ain't it hard just to leave? Oh, Baltimore, ain't it hard just to leave? Just to leave.
What's interesting is that, you kind of think to yourself, why is this Jamaican group covering a song about Baltimore? Potentially they had traveled there, but there are strong connections, I think, just geographically. This idea of this hard times in the city, in a hard town by the sea, with Kingston, Jamaica, and just what was life like in Kingston, Jamaica in the late 1970s. And just, again, this idea of lamenting for this place that you love, but it's a really hard place to live in. The Tamlins, I think they definitely capture that sense of lament in the song. I think there's some hopefulness in the track also. This is the late 70s. Dub was huge at the time, and you hear all these elements of dub in it. The bass line is amazing. The horns are amazing and give such a character to the song. As they transition into the chorus, you get that sense of crying out, that real lament in the vocals. And then, of course, what makes it so distinct is their harmonies. Yeah, so if you want to listen to Baltimore by the Tamlins, you can get the link for that on our show notes, which are on our website, triptychpod.com. But Sophie, what did you think of the track?
So I loved the song. It was great. I'm not a huge connoisseur of reggae, but I kind of immediately recognized the kind of beat. So the only reggae stuff that I've been familiar with is I'm a big fan of Paul Simon, and some of his tracks like Mother and Child Reunion from the 70s, they employed a lot of that reggae beat. So I listened to the Randy Newman version first and then went into the Tamlins. And I think the Tamlins version I think it gets the vibe better. It really, I don't know. I think it's because it has that just ongoing reggae beat, which just doesn't stop. It's kind of, I don't know, it felt like it symbolizes almost the kind of grinding poverty that we're talking about. Randy Newman's version of it, the piano builds and builds and it kind of romanticizes it. Whereas this, it's just ongoing. I really, really loved it. It's kind of just been in my head for the past few days. I keep breaking out into, oh, Baltimore, around my kitchen. And the kids are like, please stop.
They're not the only ones saying that, Sophie.
But it's so catchy. And their vocals are incredible. They're such close knit harmonies. I don't know if it's a doo-wop influence where that's come from, but yeah, that was really, really cool. So I love that. The lyrics were pretty bleak, and the Tamlins changed their lyrics slightly from Randy Newman's lyrics to make it even bleaker. So we've got the drunks bleeding in the rain. They're not just waiting for a train, or So it was pretty bleak, but yeah, great. What did you think, Mark?
I loved it. I hadn't heard of the Tamlins before. Have they toured much outside the Caribbean, do you think, Joel, or is they?
Yeah, they have. But again, this would have been years ago.
Okay.
In the early 80s, they'd have been touring in many countries in Europe and in the States.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's been a long time since then. And into the 90s, they'd have been doing some touring, though, probably more in the US. My
introduction to that kind of sound world was obviously Bob Marley and the Wailers, and I used to have sort of phases of listening to him sort of on repeat. I just found the contrast between what very often feels positive, sunny, upbeat as a musical backdrop, with the words that are anything but really stark. And it wasn't a clash. It just somehow made it all the more poignant somehow. It really worked. I didn't do my homework like Sophie did and listen to the Randy Newman one, but I'm going to do that now. But it struck me just thinking about that. What were the connections? Were there more direct connections that were being made from, the American East Coast, Baltimore, less well-off and gentrified perhaps than some of the other cities along the East Coast? And then Jamaica, you mentioned Kingston being on the sea and stuff, but the sense of despair was very strong. Would that correlate in Kingston and other cities in Jamaica?
Yeah, I think so. But also there's a strong connection between Jamaicans and the East Coast of the U.S. A lot of Jamaicans migrate there. So there's already a link there in terms of our people there and our people at home. Musically, I intended to have you guys listen to Nina Simone's cover also, because that's a musical link between Randy Newman and the Tamlins. I would imagine when you hear Nina Simone's cover, you can see why these guys are wait. Because apparently her producer wanted to push in this kind of reggae direction. So it's this very reggae influence.
Oh.
Apparently, she did not like it. She felt like she had no creative control over the album. And this was actually the title song from her album in 1978.
That one was a flop, wasn't it?
Well,
for her?
well, I didn't research that far to know, but you know, clearly the Tamlins picked up that version, and it was almost like they said, "No, but we can do that better." You know, and I think they did. I think, you know, I mean, I mean, you can't touch Nina Simone vocally. She was just a phenomenon, and just she was a thing unto herself. You know, but in terms of the vibe they were able to establish for the song, and then what you said, Mark, is interesting because, like, yeah, a lot of people who didn't grow up in a reggae environment tend to see reggae as, you know, oh, nice drinks on the beach, party vibe type thing.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of the genesis of reggae was lament and just singing about what life was like. So it's not that it was no joy, but it always was this mixed type of space where, you know, we are joyful.
A bit like the blues in a way.
Hopeful. Yes, I would say there's some similarity there for sure.
That's kind of how I found it with the laid back beat of it. It just felt like it was kind of just like almost like a resignation to this is how life is, and you're singing about it.
Yeah, there is a leaning into to what is, but again, I think there's a resilience that reggae captures in the midst of a lot of that difficulty that's experienced.
I kept on thinking, just because of the place, the TV series, the massive, big, multi-season show, The Wire, which is of course set in Baltimore, or Balmer, is I think how they say it, but I may be that I'm not good at accents. But anyway,
are you really?
What?
Oh dear. Anyway, but I thought that was a phenomenal show, you know, about the police battle with the drug gangs, and then each season added another layer to the sort of picture. You had local politics, newspapers, the schools system, and it's overwhelming because the problems are so complex and ingrained, and everybody's sort of drowning in it almost. So it's almost like decades on. Obviously, this is catching Randy Newman's original, A Moment in Time in the City, but it's like we're still here. And I kept on thinking, the Tamlins aren't thinking that either, but it just felt all the more poignant to me that actually these things haven't gone away.
Yeah, and it's that weird way a place can have an identity that doesn't seem to change much over decades. So it's interesting that that was, and again, from a songwriting perspective, I have tremendous respect for Randy Newman as a songwriter. What he was able to capture in these lyrics, and then Nina Simone giving her own treatment of that, and then the Tamlins taking that, I think is quite remarkable. In what's a quite concise lyric.
Right, gang. My masterpiece is The Artist is Present, which is a piece of performance art by the Serbian performance and concept artist Marina Abramović. I'm a huge fan of hers. There's a documentary of the same name that was released in 2012, which was kind of a recording and look back at this piece of performance art. But I'll tell you about the piece now. It was performed in MOMA, Museum of Modern Art, in New York between March and May in 2010. And it was about being present in the moment in time, an experience in time. And so what happened was she would sit in a chair and face an empty chair. She sat for about 730 hours during those 3 months. And members of the public are invited to come and sit in the empty chair across from her for a duration of their choosing. So they could sit there as long as they wanted, but there was no talking and no touching. So that sounds a little strange, but what you actually got was this kind of show of ordinary intimacy and how much can be connected and communicated just through eye contact alone. It was pretty extraordinary. So Marina, in her performance art, she often likes to explore these kind of awkward boundary liminal spaces. I went to see a retrospective of her work in the Royal Academy about 2 years ago, and you kind of think, well, how could they show a retrospective when It was just her and a chair and some people. But what they did was on one side of this huge room, they had multiple screens because every interaction had been filmed. So it had multiple screens, each showing her face for every different person. And then on the other side of the room, they had multiple screens showing close-ups of the people who had sat opposite her. And it's kind of incredible to see how much you can get from just eye contact, from like a stare. So if you're looking, I was looking at some of the people who were sat across from her, and like some people kind of appear defiant and they're kind of staring at her a bit like, yeah, you think this is art? Come on, show me. And then some people were kind of playful. You could just see like their mouth would start twitching and they'd kind of smile. And some people, it was like they sat down and disassociated. They're just like nothing there. And then, and then some people, I think just the experience of being sat across from one human and the intensity of just being kind of beheld, they would just cry. And then it's really interesting to see her face correspondingly. And you could see these subtle changes in her expression. So sometimes she'd appear slightly withdrawn, almost like she's kind of protecting herself. And I'm thinking maybe it's to the defiant gazes. And sometimes you see this kind of curiosity or playfulness in her eyes. And sometimes she has this look of compassion. It was so interesting to see what happens when you take away words. And there was this one wonderful moment on the opening night of that show. She had a former lover and collaborator called Ule. And they had done loads of work, boundary pushing kind of pieces of performance art from in the 70s. And they actually signified the end of their relationship with this piece they did where they both walked from opposite ends of the Wall of China towards each other. They met in the middle, cried and embraced, and then continued walking each away from each other. And that was the end of their relationship. Then they hadn't seen each other for 20 years. And Ule, unbeknownst to her, shows up for the opening night of The Artist is Present. And she closes her eyes before the chair is taken in front of her, so she kind of resets each time. And to have the cameras on to see her former lover and collaborator that she hasn't seen for 20 years sit in front of her, and she opens her eyes, and just the sheer emotion and connection that is had between two people, the shared history without them saying a word. It's just so emotional. They both have tears in their eyes. They both have this look of kind of softness, forgiveness, love. There's so many emotions. She actually breaks her own rules with this one because she actually reaches across and they hold hands for a moment, which is actually really beautiful. But I thought it was so interesting to see what can be communicated in the space between humans when there are no words. So I don't know whether you guys thought it was just like pretentious nonsense or an interesting experiment. So Joel, what did you make of it?
Let me get this level out of the way first. There's something that happens to us, like on this side of the world, in our part of the world, when we see people doing these things. And it's sort of like, oh gosh, these people have no problems. These people have so much time. They just like, to be able to create this as art, you have so much time. but on another level, it was quite remarkable to see. I mean, I'm not familiar, so we're introducing each other to things that we're not familiar with. And like for me, this type of performance art is just entirely unfamiliar. And first of all, just the idea of her committing herself to that kind of interaction with people is just amazing. I mean, it's taxing to be offering yourself in that sort of way. And then secondly, the notion of sitting in front of somebody and just looking at their face. We live in a world that's so just overtaken by technology. I recognize these days in Jamaica, movies have an intermission, just another way to make more money, get people to buy more snacks. So you literally cut the movie in the middle, send people to get snacks and come back. But when I was growing up, what used to happen is people would look around and see who's in the theater at intermission. Now they just look down at their phones. And we live in that generation where people are just looking at screens and do not look at faces very often. You realize how unnerving that can be, just how uncomfortable that type of intimacy is. Without touching, but just staring at somebody else's face and knowing that they are looking at you. But then on another hand, you realize just because of what we are and who we are as human beings, it really is an act of intimacy to see and be seen. And then, of course, the moment with Ule was so fantastic and amazing, because you just watch her go through these reactions, and it's heartbreaking and joyful at the same time. And you're watching them communicate without words, and it is just fantastic. I mean, he is using head movement and his eyes and everything, and he's saying a lot. You can just tell he's saying a lot to her, and years of messages are passing. And then she breaks down. And then, of course, when they reach towards one another, and then the reaction of those who are watching, the audience, just they realize, oh my goodness, we're witnessing something amazing and spectacular right here. And they just break into applause. So yeah, it was a fascinating study in just humanity.
Just hearing Joel, then I've got goosebumps again. That moment is staggering, and I was welling up. And I mean, you mentioned his head movements, just the way he, just sort of tilted his head. I don't know what it was about that, but he did it sort of 3 or 4 times. There's something so gentle and affectionate. And it's like, you could see the sense of, yeah, I know. Just this, it's very powerful. I guess it proves at one level the reality of body language. I mean, sometimes people make a big deal of it and they say they can read it and all kinds of stuff. And maybe some people are more attuned to it than others. But when you actually explicitly ban verbal language, that's sort of scraped away and you're reliant just on your physicality. It's just really quite remarkable. I was trying to think if I didn't know that he had been in a relationship with her years before, what that would have looked like or what I would have made of it. But I guess the fact that, this is the only time where she touches somebody and reaches out. And, there's obviously a big gap between them. So she has to stretch. And, that there's something unique about this guy who's turned up. But knowing the backstory makes it all the more moving, really. So, wow. I guess if you're doing this for 3 months, and that happens on the first night, it's kind of downhill from there, isn't it?
Yeah, a little bit. You'd be like, oh man, it's just a regular, normal person again.
Yeah, it's going to be other normal people now. Oh, boring.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm thinking about the 2006 movie The Lives of Others. It's German language. It was originally called Das Leben der Anderen. It's set in East Germany, obviously before unification. And so when East Germany, the GDR, the German Democratic Republic, was communist and West Germany was capitalist. It's a depiction of what it was like, possibly, to live under the totalitarian regime of the East German Communist Party, but more particularly their secret service, which was called the Stasi, the security services. And basically they surveilled pretty much everything. And they were kind of iconic in the pre-digital age for really knowing pretty much everything about what was going on, or at least attempting to. And the film won Best Foreign Language Movie Oscar in 2007. And it is actually a very, very good film. And I know that a lot of people don't like watching movies with subtitles necessarily, but this is one of those movies that you very quickly forget that you are watching something with subtitles. You're completely drawn in. And I think it's one of the most astonishing movies I've ever seen. I've lost count of how many times I've seen it now. I thought I'd just read a synopsis that's offered on IMDb. This is by a guy called Gary K. McD. He's written something like 90,000 synopses on IMDb. So I don't know what he's doing for the rest of his life. Maybe that is his life. But anyway, this is quite impressive.
Wow.
Yeah, it's good, isn't it? So this is his offering. Gerd Wiesler is an officer with the Stasi, the East German secret police. The film begins in 1984 when Wiesler attends a play written by George Dreimann, who is considered by many to be the ultimate example of loyalty. Wiesler has a gut feeling that Dryman can't be as ideal as he seems and believes that surveillance is called for. The Minister of Culture agrees, but only later does Wiesler learn that the minister sees Dryman as a rival and lusts after his partner, Christa Maria. The more time he spends listening in on them, the more he comes to care about them. The once rigid Stasi officer begins to intervene in their lives in a positive way, actually protecting them whenever possible. Eventually, Wiesler's activities catch up to him, and while there's no proof of wrongdoing, he finds himself in a menial job until the unbelievable happens. I think that's a pretty good synopsis. There are so many things that we can say about this. The big theme underlying the whole piece is what it means to live a good life, really, to be a good man or a bad man. In fact, those terms actually come up at several points. They are key turning points. And there's a piece of music that is played called Sonata for a Good Man. That actually is really quite significant. We'll come back to that. It's also all about observation. And as a playwright, Dryman is constantly observing to create realism in his dramas. So he's always looking. But then, of course, the Stasi is always doing that, not for artistic gain, but for more malicious intent. So Wiesler is the senior officer assigned to watch over this guy. And I don't know whether you picked this up, but I don't think you ever see him blink in the film. Basically, he's always staring, and you never see him sort of flag in that, really. But the other thing is, the script is so tight and so intricate. There are allusions, there are many conversations where people are saying one thing and meaning something completely different, and sometimes both at the same time. So you've got to interpret everything at multiple levels, but that in itself is characteristic of living under this totalitarian surveillance culture. It is a remarkable script, and I think it's probably got one of the most glorious last lines of any movie I know. But maybe we could come to that as well. Anyway, had you seen this before, either of you?
Yeah, it's a big favourite of mine. So,
oh right, okay.
I hadn't watched it in quite a number of years, but it's kind of always in my like top 5 movies of all time. Huge fan. I just love seeing, I don't know if it's the character arc of Wiesler or perhaps just we're understanding him better as the film goes on. Because I think when you first see him and he's just like this ruthless interrogator and you're just like, oh, well, there's our bad guy. And then you see that actually what he is a very strongly principled person. And his disillusionment with the East German Communist Party is because he wants to surveil this writer, not because he's a bad person. He wants to surveil the writer because he cares about the principles of what the Communist Party stands for. And then he starts to realize that his superiors in the Communist Party are actually motivated not by the purity of the party and what they want. They're actually motivated by lust and greed and power. And that's where he becomes disillusioned and starts to see that the principles that are represented by the writer and his girlfriend of like truth and beauty and love and connection are actually great principles. He starts to switch what his principles are. So it's not like he's a baddie become a goodie. It's just that he has a realization based on his way of seeing the world. Yeah, it's just beautiful.
So I had never seen this film. So it was quite an adventure. Mark, I had no idea where you were taking us.
Oh dear.
But it was, yeah. So it really was an emotional journey for me. Yeah, like Sophie said, at the start, you think, ugh, you know, about Wiesler's character, and you think, oh my goodness, this guy is the epitome of evil. He's heartless. You know, the opening scene where he's teaching the students about interrogation and just breaking this man down. was really affecting. But then also you start to gain compassion for him as you see just how stark and lonely his life is. So that was the first scene when I think my attitude to him started to change, because I'm like, oh my goodness, they did such a good job both in the cinematography and in the set with his apartment. The first time he goes into his apartment, and you realize his life is entirely empty. He has no one. He barely has anything. It's very neat, but just sterile. And even
he's just
even
got one coat.
Yeah. Going on this journey with this character, and as you say, Sophie, he's very principled, he's idealistic, and then he realizes he's supporting a system that is just corrupt and broken, and it's known. So is it Grubitz, his supervisor?
Yes.
Again, you start to contrast characters, because now you realize that no, it's not that Wiesler is the evil one. Grubitz is the evil one. He knows exactly what's going on, and he's just using the system for his own personal gain. He doesn't care about any of what they claim to care about. Even his joking in the cafeteria just showed this person who will be what he needs to be in a situation to gain what he wants to gain.
Did you notice when the guy from the canteen comes back?
I did.
He comes back again
Is that
in
the
the
guy
movie
from the canteen? Yeah, I was pretty sure it was, but I thought that's amazing. That's really good writing to bring him back in that way.
Isn't it good?
Yeah. Yeah, but I think that the story was compelling all the way through, and it had turns and twists that I did not expect. He really took us on an emotional journey. So I mean, thank you. That was a brilliant watch, and just so engrossing. Good. And then what was weird to me is you're getting to the end of the film and he starts jumping years. I didn't expect that, because all along it's just been a continuous story, but then you see why he's jumping years, and then you're right, that last line was just, oh my goodness, and bringing back some of those ideas of the good man. And yes, at the same time, it wasn't a happy ending film, in the sense of, everything doesn't turn out all right for everybody. So there was a realism to it. I found it interesting that Wiesler continued to live basically in the same places, even after the fall of the Berlin Wall. It's kind of like, you'd think this guy would just hightail it out of Germany, but he just continues on. But yet this one defining act, these relationships he had without much contact with the people at all, but where he moved in to try to help and to save, it was just, it was really, really well done.
I think what's interesting about that is that unless Dreimann had noticed what had happened, nobody would have known.
Yeah.
So none of the Stasi colleagues would have noticed. Wiesler was never going to tell anybody. And it was just because Dreimann is going through his files and he notices subtle changes in the report, because everything was written down, that he twigs, hang on, that's weird. Someone's actually looking out for me here. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the phenomenal things about this. I remember there's an amazing book by Timothy Garden Ash, who was a British economist who was studying around this sort of time of the setting, sort of early 80s. And he writes a book 10 years later called The File. I couldn't put it down. It's a short book where basically he spent, I think, half a year living in East Berlin and half a year living in West Berlin. And he went 10 years later to open his file. If you have a file on you, you are legally permitted to read it. Basically, he talks about this in the book. What happens if somebody denies being an unofficial informant, but in the files it says they're an informant? Nobody's going to know unless they have different arrangements, but that dies with them. And so you just have the files, and actually the files themselves don't tell the whole story. So I think it's a remarkably layered piece of writing, because at each stage it's meaning something bigger than what you see on the screen. It's interesting. We've had three masterpieces that reflect very specific places almost, or even rooms. So with the Marina Abramović, she is in a room, but then in the song you got Baltimore, in the movie you got East Germany. They're very located things. But I wonder, are there other things that resonate or connect with each other.
One thing I thought was really interesting was I linked up in my head the lives of others and the Marina Abramović. With Marina and whoever she sat across, there's no communication, there's no talking, yet there is so much held in that space between them. There's that, whether that's compassion or love or regret or whatever. And then similarly, we're in the lives of others, our two main guys, George Dreiman, the writer, and then the Stasi guy, Wiesler. They have no contact ever. They never meet in the film, like properly. They never talk. And yet, through observation, through Wiesler's observation, there is such a kind of an understanding, a compassion, and things happen because of that. And again, I just thought it was a really interesting thing about the kind of human connection and human psyche, about what can happen even when no words are exchanged.
And actually, that connection only comes in the last 5% of the movie. So all the way through, it's been one direction. Wiesler it's a sort of vicarious living, isn't it? The fullness of his life comes entirely through what he's seeing in Dreiman's life and relationships. But Dreiman only gets it right at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then it's just interesting. It's Marina's piece is just connection without words. It's just by looking. For the most part, Wiesler was not looking; he was listening. But then towards the end, Dreiman reads his words, Wiesler's words, which all of what Wiesler is listening to in Dreiman's apartment is real. Is very much the substance of these people's lives when they don't think they're being surveilled. But then Dreiman now goes and reads Wiesler's report, which is contrived to protect him. So he's even made up a play. This surveillance officer has
He's
written
a playwright.
has written the plot of a play to keep up the ruse that these people weren't conspiring. So it's just interesting, that connection between the listening, the written word, just face to face looking, and just how connections are being built in every situation, but they're very different from one another.
What do you think of the piece of music, the Sonata for a Good Man? What impact does that have in the narrative, would you say?
Oh, I love that moment when you are watching Dreiman playing the Sonata for the Good Man, and then it cuts to Wiesler just listening to it. And again, he doesn't blink. His eyes are just staring straight ahead, but there's like tears start rolling down his face, and you see how impacted he is by the beauty of it, by the music, and, also that theme of what does it mean to be a good man.
And then the spell is broken by that oaf who comes in.
Yes.
Right, yes. who's not on the same wavelength at all in terms of his interaction with these characters. But like as a piece of music, it was dissonant. It was, it's just interesting, the qualities of the music and then the effect that has on Wiesler as he's listening. And again, you're thinking East Germany, art is very controlled here. Just as a means of propaganda and as a means of kind of keeping people in the same place. And here he is listening to this fantastic composition. He knows the title of it, and it's affecting him. And it did feel like a watershed moment in his whole journey, just being affected by the beauty of this piece. Yet it's a tragic piece at the same time, because he's playing this after the suicide of his friend. Right. So yeah, it's just an interesting, the layering of emotions there. Which kind of moves me to Baltimore in terms of the layering of emotions. And again, the power of music to tell a story, where you do have a layering of emotions here, where the lyric now is tragic but plaintive, that sense of loss and grieving loss in a place that you want to be beautiful, but isn't really beautiful in what it's become. And I think just when you think about now I'm thinking about place and that contrast between this city in East Germany and Baltimore, and just how place can shape us so much, and how a lot of our lives is responding to the place and the circumstances and the history that we're living out.
Yeah. No, I totally noticed that connection with like the place in Baltimore and the song, and then with East Germany, because again, it's these places that want to be something else but aren't. In the East German, They have this dream of what this kind of communist utopia should be, but the reality is just bleak. People are poor and everything is a shade of grey. Having visited some of those sites in East Berlin. I'm like, yes, that's exactly it. It's just grey. And I also thought it was interesting with some of the lyrics in Baltimore as well, that they talk about good people hide their faces and they hide their eyes. And that really just kind of tunes into some of the themes in the lives of others as well. The idea about some people are looking away from the corruption just because they're like, well, I'm going to get ahead. And Wiesler starts to react to that. He wants to be this good man by the end because he's understood what true principles are.
To that end, you could almost rename the sonata to a sonata for becoming a good man in a way, because that's the turning point where he sees that there's so much more in the world and so much more to live for. But it's all, I think in the end, it's a measure of the quality of relationships that George Dreimann has with lots of people, not just Christa Maria, but also with Hauser, with Yerske, the guy who takes his own life, and so on, that these are all very precious, whereas Wiesler doesn't have a single relationship. You know, what's he called? Grubitz. They were obviously mates from college. They're supposedly friends and they josh around a bit, but you know, at the end, there's absolutely no compunction about turning on him. So I just wonder with the Baltimore song, what is it that makes him, Randy Newman here, but also as it's sort of adopted by others, so affectionate for this place? If it's so awful, is it not the roots and the relationships you have in that place, and how tragic it is to see other people, whether they're drunkards or sex workers or whatever it is, that is just destroying lives, wasting lives.
Yeah, I think it shows our capacity to love a broken world, you know, which I think is just fascinating about us. That it's almost like we can see that something's wrong, but it ought not to be, and we're longing for better in that. And I think that comes out in Randy Newman. Even in his leaving Baltimore, there's I want a better place, but I can't lose this sense of connection to where I'm coming from. So yeah, I just think that desire, and I think you see some of that in the East German setting with Dreimann, and wanting to make statements. You know, it's the death of his friend that kind of moves him out of I'm going to play it safe, but no, I want the world to see what's going on here. But I think underneath that is wanting the place to change, is wanting better for the people who live there. So I think there's that struggle in both, you know.
I just think it's interesting that all three of them actually have this underlying theme of isolation and loneliness and what it is to be in the world, be a human trying to make sense of a very broken, bleak world. It's interesting in the way that Marina tackles that by allowing another human soul to be beheld for a moment, you know, and the power of that is just a simple thing. When you see the isolation present in this world, shown in Baltimore, shown in East Berlin, the power of being beheld as another human and having that connection soul to soul, even if words aren't shared. I think that's really interesting.
Incidentally, Sophie, do you know if, because I want to know whether she talked with Ule later that evening or at some point after that?
Yes.
Or was this a Great Wall of China moment again?
No, so they do actually discuss it. So there is a documentary called The Artist is Present, and I think it's part of the documentary because it was made about 2 years later. So they actually sit in a room together and discuss the emotions they were both feeling and kind of the shared history that they felt. And it's really, really poignant. I've seen clips of it, and it's really poignant and beautiful, especially as Ule died in 2020. So like it just captured that moment in time. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
So it captured the meeting of souls and human connection.
Yes. And while we're talking about that, I just wanted to mention her dress.
Oh,
yes, I was going there.
Red dress. I mean, here you are in this sort of stark, empty gallery, just a plain couple of chairs and table, and I don't know, it's like something out of the rubbish early Star Wars sequels, you know, sort of Padma or something, but more dramatic.
Yes.
I mean, it's a fascinating choice in terms of color, and I would contrast it with just the look of The Lives of Others the whole way through. It's like
It's great.
all of the colors are muted. They fit the mood of the moment. So it's just fascinating that she has chosen this bright red dress. Everybody else is dressed in what they would be wearing, but she has a bright red, long, flowing dress. It definitely is a statement piece, but just
I feel like it's a statement on beauty and its capacity to change things. You know, I mean, like, you don't have the colors in like The Lives of Others, but when he's reading Brecht and when he's then listening to the piece of music, those are the moments that change him. You know, he's changed by beauty.
That's important because I can't remember, is it Hempf or Grubitz early on, one of the despicable Stasi guys basically says people don't change. They can't change. And so that's why we need to keep a watch on them and stuff. But the whole point of the movie is that here is somebody who is changed by beauty in the face of an utterly bleak, barren architectural landscape.
Yeah, and he comes into contact with people and relationships that for him become worth saving, worth preserving, worth protecting from this system, which just kind of chews people up and spits them out and maintains just control over people's lives. So yeah, it's just fascinating. Yeah, the transformation in him and how he's moved to action by that.
So actually all three are about love. They're about love for, a city, but a city is not an object. It's a community of people. And in Baltimore, they are broken and discarded. But I think particularly with the Marina meeting Ule, that in itself is an astonishing moment. It's very beautiful, but it is about a love that they had and still seem to have. And then Wiesler loves both Dryman and Christa Maria, that amazing scene in the cafe where he says, I'm your audience.
Yes.
Anyway,
it's just too much. It's so beautiful.
I know. In fact, I think I'm going to have to call a stop to this.
I think it's worth noting to our listeners, though, that when it comes to discussing these pieces, we know what each of the other is going to bring in terms of masterpiece, but we never discuss the connections. And I think it's so fascinating to see how much link up and how many themes are universal, even when it's unplanned by us.
Yeah, for sure.
Sophie, that's exactly right. I wasn't anticipating anything like these things. Sorry, Joel.
No, I was just agreeing. I mean, I actually came in thinking like, you guys are going to have to do a lot of work here because I'm not sure. These are so different from one another. These three masterpieces. But recognizing the connections just as we talk it through and starting to understand the effect of the art that the art has on us. And possibly the effect that the creators wanted it to have in terms of the stories they want to tell.
Well, I'm getting very emotional, so I think we do need to call a halt to this very promptly because I'm English. But do you want to have some last words, Sophie and Joel? Final thoughts?
Well, I mean, not to just mention the show notes again for the sake of it, but yeah, I mean, we'd really want you to go and take in these pieces. So yeah, just take a look at the show notes. All the links are there. Triptychpod.com.
I love just carrying with me into this week that beauty changes us. I'm going to carry that with me. I think that's a great thing.
Wonderful. Well,
so I guess it's goodbye.
I think that's the point we've reached. Yeah. So Sophie said goodbye. What about Joel?
I'd like to say goodbye also. Until next time.
Goodbye. That was Triptych, hosted by me, Mark Mennell, with Joel Bain in Jamaica and Sophie Killingly in the UK, with tech and editorial expertise from Owen Feetham. Visit our website at triptychpod.com, that is triptychpod.com, for episode show notes, background information and various links. Please do get in touch with any questions, comments and even suggestions for future episodes. And if you've enjoyed this, please do share it around and rate us wherever you get your podcasts.